In 1949, the KGB built golden toilets for a visiting leader, not for luxury, but to steal something far more secret, his DNA. It was the winter of 1949, and Moscow was buried under snow. Inside the high-security walls of Lubyanka, headquarters of the Soviet secret police, a curious meeting took place. The head of the KGB's scientific research department received a secret order, one that would sound absurd to anyone outside the room. They were to build 2 identical toilets, one for regular use, and one for a world leader who would soon visit the Soviet Union. But these toilets had a hidden purpose. They were not designed for comfort. They were designed to collect urine and feces samples without the user ever knowing. The man they were preparing for was none other than Chairman Mao Zedong, the revolutionary leader of Communist China, who was traveling to Moscow to meet Joseph Stalin for the first time. For the Soviets, this was not just diplomacy, it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to study Mao himself. Stalin wanted to know everything about this new ally, not through words, but through science. And that meant analyzing Mao's bodily fluids to determine his health, his mental state, and even his loyalty. In secret underground labs, scientists prepared the most bizarre espionage experiment in history. Specialized equipment was hidden beneath the toilet bowls to preserve samples for laboratory testing. Each drop, each molecule, would be examined to extract biological and psychological data. The KGB called it biological intelligence. To Stalin, it was a window into Mao's mind, and a way to know whether this powerful new communist leader could be trusted or controlled. As Mao's visit neared, Soviet agents worked in silence, disguising the operation as ordinary hospitality. The fake toilets were installed in Mao's suite inside the Konsevodesha, a heavily guarded residence outside Moscow. Every detail was double-checked. Even the plumbing was disguised to lead not to the sewage system, but to hidden collection containers deep underground. No one, not Mao, not his guards, not even his translators, had the slightest idea that every trip to the bathroom would become a secret experiment ordered by Stalin himself. The stage was set. The world's most unusual act of espionage was about to begin, one that involved no guns, no spies in disguise, just a toilet and one man's obsession with power. When Mao Zedong arrived in Moscow in December 1949, he was welcomed like a hero, red flags waving, crowds cheering, Soviet officials saluting. But behind the grandeur of his welcome, the KGB had already begun their most bizarre mission. Inside a mansion specially prepared for Mao's stay, every detail was perfect, from the silk curtains to the furniture imported from Beijing. But what Mao didn't know was that even the bathroom had been custom-made. Stalin's secret service had installed 2 identical toilet systems, one real and one fake. The fake one was connected through hidden pipes leading to a lab beneath the mansion. Each time Mao used it, the KGB scientist collected his urine and fecal samples, not to spy on his thoughts, but on his health. Why? Because Stalin didn't trust anyone, not even his closest allies. He wanted to know everything about Mao, his diet, his stress levels, even signs of illness that could hint at weakness. To Stalin, biology was another weapon of intelligence. For days, Mao lived in that house, giving speeches, meeting Soviet officials, completely unaware that every flush revealed more about him than his words ever could. Meanwhile, in a secret lab, Soviet doctors in white coats analyzed his samples under dim yellow lights, whispering, "He's healthy, strong, not afraid." That was enough to make Stalin uneasy. He had hoped for signs of frailty, not strength. In the cold December nights, Stalin read those medical reports with his pipe in hand, a faint smirk forming on his lips. He didn't know it yet, but this strange toilet operation would become one of the most absurd and most secretive espionage acts of the Cold War. As days passed in Moscow, Mao Zedong began to feel uneasy. Something about the grand Soviet hospitality seemed too perfect. The walls of his mansion whispered silence, and the staff, polite, efficient, emotionless, moved like shadows. At night, Mao would take slow walks through the corridors, his slippers echoing against marble floors. He noticed how every step he took, every door he opened, every sound he made seemed to carry beyond the walls. The phones were new, the lamps had unusual switches, and even the toilets gleaming. Foreign made him suspicious. He once asked his translator half-jokingly, "Comrade, do these people also listen when we sleep?" The translator smiled nervously, unsure if it was truly a joke. In reality, the KGB surveillance was everywhere. Hidden microphones behind portraits of Lenin, cameras disguised inside flower pots, and pipes that led not just to the sewer, but to secret labs below. The Operation Golden Stream, as it was codenamed, was still active. Every morning, Soviet scientists documented Mao's samples with medical precision. Stalin's paranoia had no limits. He wanted to know if Mao's kidneys were weak, if he drank too much tea, if he was hiding any illness that could make him less threatening. To Stalin, Mao's urine was a report on his soul. Meanwhile, Mao's aides began to notice small changes, the staff avoiding certain rooms, Russian technicians visiting the mansion late at night, and strange odors coming from the basement. But they dared not question. For to question was to admit suspicion, and suspicion, in Moscow, was dangerous. Outside, the winter deepened. Snow buried the city under silence, and the Soviet flag waved stiffly against the gray sky. Inside the Kremlin, Stalin smoked his pipe and stared at Mao's medical files with a blank expression. The reports said Mao was healthy, confident, no sign of fear. For a man like Stalin, that was not reassuring, it was threatening. The strange operation continued, not just as espionage, but as a psychological game between two giants of ideology. One man seeking dominance through power, the other through endurance. Neither realizing that trust had already frozen between them like the Moscow winter outside. Deep beneath the marble floors of the Kremlin, in a sealed laboratory with no windows, Soviet scientists worked in silence. They called it the hygiene department, but it was anything but ordinary. Their true mission, hidden even from most of the KGB, was to analyze what no one dared to talk about aloud: the biological remains of foreign leaders. Each morning, a courier delivered a small, sealed glass container marked only with the initials MZ. The scientists treated it like a state secret. Wearing thick gloves, they recorded everything: pH levels, chemical traces, hormone balance, signs of stress or fatigue. At the center of the room stood Professor Yuri Poutiv, one of Stalin's most trusted biochemists. He stared at the results with unease. Greater than healthy. No signs of disease. Strong adrenal activity, he muttered, his voice echoing in the metallic chamber. He knew what that meant. Mao was physically strong and mentally unbroken. When the report reached Stalin, the old dictator read it in silence. He sat in his dark office, a single lamp burning beside a half-empty glass of vodka. On his desk lay two files, one labeled MZ, China, and the other TK, Yugoslavia, for Tito. He turned a page, exhaled smoke, and whispered, "So, Mao is not a man to control. He's a man to fear." The information was both a triumph and a threat. If Mao was healthy and ambitious, he might soon challenge Soviet influence in Asia. Stalin's suspicion only deepened. The secret operation, meant to reassure him, had instead planted a new seed of paranoia. Meanwhile, Mao continued his visit, smiling for photographers, attending meetings, signing agreements, unaware that every handshake, every laugh, every sip of tea was being measured by the eyes and instruments of the KGB. Back at the laboratory, the scientists began preparing to destroy the remaining evidence. Poutiv hesitated for a moment, staring at the final vial. He couldn't help but wonder, what kind of world is this, where the most powerful men can't trust even their own blood? Outside, the Moscow night grew darker. The snow had stopped, leaving a frozen silence across Red Square. And in that silence, one truth became clear: the war between Stalin and Mao had not yet begun. It had only changed form. Cinematic Cold War atmosphere. Moscow's snow-covered train station at dawn 1949. Mao Zedong's steam train departing with red, Soviet flags fluttering in the wind. In the background, Stalin watches from a Kremlin window, his face half lit by golden light. Beneath the surface, symbolic cutaway, KGB officers burn secret files marked Operation Golden Stream, flames reflecting off their faces. A faint image of a sealed rusted safe sits in the shadows, hinting at secrets never destroyed. Style, hyper-realistic, cinematic lighting, winter tones, strong storytelling depth, 16:9 composition. The winter of 1949 began to fade, but tension inside the Kremlin only grew colder. Mao Zedong's visit had ended. His special train stood ready at Moscow's Yaroslavsky station, steaming in the bitter morning air. Snowflakes melted on the iron rails, turning to gray water that reflected the Soviet flags above. Inside the train, Mao smiled faintly as Soviet officers offered their final farewells. "Greater than Chairman Mao," one translator said politely. "Comrade Stalin sends his warmest regards." Mao nodded, but his eyes stayed still. He had sensed something in Moscow. Something strange in how they watched him, how servants lingered too long, how every move was observed. As the train began to move, a quiet order passed through the Kremlin halls. Inside the KGB's secret archive, a young officer received a sealed envelope stamped "Destroy" after reading. It contained the files labeled Operation Golden Stream. No one spoke the operation's true name aloud. It sounded too absurd, too dangerous to exist. In the laboratory, the scientists who had worked day and night were told to burn their notes. The vials, the reports, the instruments, all gone within hours. Only Professor Podhev hesitated again, watching the final papers curl into ash. He whispered to his assistant, "We tried to read a man's soul through his urine. Maybe that says more about us than him." Above them, Stalin stood by his office window, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the horizon. He didn't trust Mao, but he respected him and perhaps even feared what the Chinese leader could become. To Stalin, the experiment had given him no control, only proof that power could never be contained, only measured. Far away, Mao's train rolled east through the white plains of Russia. He looked out at the frozen landscape and muttered to his interpreter, "They think they understand me, but they never will." The wind howled outside the train, carrying secrets across the steppes, secrets that would remain buried for decades. And deep under the Kremlin, a few charred fragments of a report survived, sealed inside a rusted safe. A single word still legible on the cover, "MZ." Not until years later, when former KGB officers whispered to journalists about the strangest intelligence mission in Soviet history, the day Stalin's spies built toilets to read the mind of Mao Zedong. Decades passed. The Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, and dusty archives opened their iron doors to the light for the first time. In 1992, a retired KGB officer named Yuri Krotkov sat in a dim Moscow cafe, sipping black tea as a young reporter pressed a recorder closer. "Greater than. Tell me," the journalist whispered, "is it true? Stalin ordered scientists to study Mao's urine?" Krotkov chuckled bitterly. "Greater than. You think I'm joking? They built golden toilets for him. Real gold. But the value wasn't in the metal. It was in what went down the drain." For hours he told the reporter everything: the hidden lab, the midnight deliveries, the sealed test tubes marked MZ. And when the story broke, the world didn't know whether to laugh or shudder. Some dismissed it as Cold War fantasy. Propaganda too ridiculous to believe. But then, buried deep in the Russian state archives, a faded memo surfaced, signed by a senior intelligence officer, dated January 20th, 1950, referencing a biological analysis of foreign dignitaries' waste samples. That one line changed everything. Suddenly, historians began piecing together forgotten fragments, reports from Soviet engineers who built sanitary rooms for foreign guests, chemical notes written in code, and photographs of gleaming pipes behind the Kremlin walls. By the late 1990s, the world finally understood. It wasn't just a rumor, it was a symbol of paranoia, of power pushed to its strangest limits. The idea that a world leader would collect another's bodily waste just to measure his mind, it revealed the essence of the Cold War itself. Control, fear, and the desperate hunger to know what your enemy is thinking. Yuri Krotkov's interview ended with one haunting line, "Greater than. We thought we were protecting the motherland," he said softly. But in truth, we were just trying to outguess a ghost. As he left the cafe, snow began to fall again, Moscow's endless winter returning. The journalist turned off the recorder and stared into the street, wondering how many more secrets still lay buried beneath the Kremlin stones. And somewhere in an old government vault, under layers of dust and silence, still sits a single steel drawer. Inside it, a cracked glass vial, label almost gone. Only two faint letters remain, MZ.
Thanks you for watch. Every old story holds a lesson worth remembering. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe for watch and listen more old times, real stories, and don't forget,